Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it.
From the moment I could form thoughts, I imagined myself walking the grand halls of a hotel, the scent of freshly polished wood and the soft hum of conversations filling the air. My father used to take me to the hotel where he worked as a bellhop when I was little. I'd sit on the plush lobby chairs, watching as he greeted guests with a wide smile, his uniform crisp despite the sweat beading on his forehead. One day he would say, ruffling my hair, "You'll be the one giving orders around here, Beatrix. Mark my words." But as the years passed, those words faded into a bitter memory. The weight of broken promises and shattered dreams hung over our house like a dark cloud. My father's drinking had grown worse, transforming him from the cheerful man who used to dance with me around our tiny living room into someone I barely recognized. My mother, once hopeful and bright-eyed, now wore a permanent frown as she fretted over unpaid bills and my father's dwindling paycheck. I clung to my dreams like a lifeline, poring over hotel management books and practicing my professional voice in the mirror. But every time I mentioned my plans, my mother's face would harden. "Hotels are for the wealthy, Beatrix," she'd say, her tone sharp. "You need something stable, something that will keep food on the table, not some foolish fantasy." One evening, after another argument between my parents, I approached my mother with trembling hands, holding the brochure for a hotel management course. "I've saved up some money," I began, my voice wavering. "I can start next semester and—" "Enough, Beatrix." My mother's voice cut through the air like a whip. She snatched the brochure from my hands, crumpling it with a force that made my heart clench. "We can barely afford to keep the lights on, and you want to waste money on this? You'll end up just like your father, chasing dreams that lead nowhere." Tears welled up in my eyes as I watched her toss the brochure into the trash. I wanted to scream, to argue, but the weight of her disappointment crushed any words that tried to escape. Instead, I swallowed my frustration and nodded, the fire inside me dimming to a flicker. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I made a silent promise to myself. I would find a way, somehow, to make my dream a reality. But as the months turned into years, life had other plans. My father's drinking spiraled out of control, and my mother's health began to decline under the stress of it all. The money I had saved for school went toward medical bills and groceries, and soon the idea of becoming a hotel manager felt like a distant memory, a childhood fantasy that had no place in the harsh reality of adulthood. Then Benjamin came into my life. He was kind, patient, and understanding, everything I needed during those dark times. We met at a small cafe where I worked weekends, and from the moment he walked in, something clicked. He had a way of making the world seem brighter, of making me believe that maybe, just maybe, my dreams weren't entirely out of reach. Benjamin encouraged me in ways my parents never had. "If you want to be a hotel manager, then go for it," he would say, his eyes full of sincerity. "You have the passion and the drive, Beatrix. Don't let anything hold you back." I fell in love with him for that, among many other reasons. He saw the best in me, even when I couldn't see it myself. We married not long after, a small ceremony with just a few close friends. For the first time in a long while, I felt like life was starting to make sense. But life has a cruel way of disrupting even the best laid plans. Not long after our wedding, my mother passed away unexpectedly. The grief was unbearable, a heavy, suffocating presence that settled over my heart. I tried to be strong for my father, but he was too far gone, lost in his own misery. Benjamin was my rock during those days, holding me close as I wept for the woman whom had sacrificed so much for me. As if the loss of my mother wasn't enough, I soon found out I was pregnant. Morning sickness hit me hard, making it difficult to keep up with my job and the household responsibilities. Benjamin was supportive, but I could see the worry in his eyes. We were barely scraping by as it was, and the thought of bringing a child into our world of uncertainty was daunting. Yet, despite the challenges, I clung to my dream. I started taking online courses in hotel management, studying whenever I could find a spare moment. Benjamin cheered me on, even as our financial situation grew more precarious. I could see the strain it was putting on him, but he never once complained. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, tragedy struck again. Benjamin was killed in a car accident on his way home from work. I still remember the knock on the door, the somber expression of the police officer who delivered the news. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me, leaving me to tumble into an abyss of despair. In the blink of an eye, I was left with nothing, no husband, no home, and a mountain of debt that I had no hope of paying off. The hospital bills, the funeral costs, the mortgage, it all came crashing down on me like a tidal wave. I had no choice but to sell what little we had and move out of our apartment. With nowhere else to go, Ben and I found ourselves on the streets, our dreams shattered and our future uncertain. The cold had a way of creeping into your bones when you had nowhere to go. It was a kind of cold that no amount of layering could keep out, a chill that gnawed at your spirit as much as your body. I pulled Ben closer to me, wrapping my arms around his small frame, trying to shield him from the worst of it. His breath came out in small puffs of steam, his eyes half closed from exhaustion, but he didn't complain. He was too young to understand fully, but he knew enough to sense that something was wrong. It had only been 2 weeks since Benjamin's accident, but the world as I knew it had crumbled in that short time. One moment, we were planning for our future, discussing baby names and nursery colors. The next, I was alone, with a mountain of debt, and no roof over our heads. The house was gone, repossessed by the bank, and the few belongings I managed to salvage were stuffed into a tattered duffel bag now lying at my feet. The train station had become our temporary refuge. It was warm enough, and no one asked questions if you kept your head down. Ben and I huddled together on one of the benches, trying to stay invisible, just another pair of lost souls among the crowd. Every time an officer walked by, I held my breath, praying they wouldn't notice us. But I knew we couldn't stay here forever. Sooner or later, someone would tell us to move along, and I had no idea where we would go next. "Mommy, I'm hungry," Ben whispered, his voice barely audible over the noise of the station. I forced a smile, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "I know, sweetheart. We'll find something soon, I promise." In truth, I had no idea where our next meal would come from. The few dollars I had left wouldn't last much longer, and the thought of begging made my stomach turn. But as the hours dragged on, I realized I had no other choice. I spotted a food cart near the entrance, the smell of hot pretzels wafting through the air. My heart ached at the thought of asking for a handout, but when I looked down at Ben's pale face, determination took over. I stood up, pulling him along with me. "Excuse me, sir," I began, my voice shaking slightly as I approached the vendor. I'm sorry to bother you, but is there any way you could spare a pretzel? Just one for my son." The man looked at me, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought he would turn us away, but then he sighed, reaching into the cart and pulling out a warm pretzel. "Here," he said gruffly, handing it to Ben. "Take it." Tears stung my eyes as I watched Ben take the pretzel with a grateful smile, his small hands clutching it as though it were the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much." "Don't mention it," the vendor replied, waving me off. "Just take care of him." We returned to our bench, and I watched as Ben eagerly bit into the pretzel, savoring every morsel. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep him going, at least for a little while. As night fell, the station grew quieter, the bustling crowds thinning out until only a few stragglers remained. I knew we couldn't stay here much longer. The station would close soon, and we would be forced back out into the cold. But where could we go? The shelters were full, and the thought of wandering the streets with Ben terrified me. Just as I was beginning to lose hope, a security guard approached, his face set in a stern frown. "Mom, you can't stay here," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "The station's closing. You need to leave." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat as I stood up, gathering our meager belongings. "Come on, Ben," I whispered, taking his hand. "We have to go." "Where are we going, Mommy?" he asked, his voice small and tired. "Somewhere safe," I replied, though I had no idea where that would be. We stepped out into the night, the cold air hitting us like a slap in the face. I pulled Ben closer, whispering a silent prayer for strength, for a miracle, for something, anything, that would keep us from falling any further. As we walked down the dimly lit streets, I realized that survival had become my only goal. The dreams I once held so dear were now buried beneath the harsh reality of our situation. But even in the darkest moments, a small part of me refused to let go entirely. Perhaps it was foolish, but I clung to the hope that somehow, some way, we would find our way out of this nightmare. Until then, all I could do was put one foot in front of the other, determined to keep going, no matter how impossible the road ahead seemed. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting a soft, golden light across the park. I hadn't slept much the night before, worried about what the day would bring. Ben was still dozing beside me, his small body curled up under the thin blanket that was barely enough to keep the chill at bay. The bench had become our bed for the past 2 nights, and though it was far from comfortable, it was safer than the streets. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of laughter. A child's laughter, bright and carefree, a stark contrast to the heaviness in my heart. I turned to see a young girl, no older than 4 or 5, running through the park, her blonde curls bouncing as she chased after a runaway stroller. My heart skipped a beat as I realized the stroller was headed straight for the pond. Without thinking, I jumped to my feet and sprinted toward the stroller. My legs moved on instinct, faster than I thought possible given the exhaustion that weighed me down. I could hear the girl's cries growing more frantic as the stroller picked up speed, barreling toward the water's edge. I reached out, my fingers brushing the handle just in time to pull it back from the brink. The stroller teetered for a moment, then fell backward into my arms. I caught my breath, my heart racing as I looked down at the baby inside, who was blissfully unaware of the danger it had just been in. "Mommy, Mommy," the little girl called out, her voice trembling with fear and relief. She ran over to me, her wide eyes filled with gratitude and panic. "You saved my sister." I smiled, trying to calm her down. "It's okay, sweetheart, she's safe now." A moment later, a woman came rushing over, her face pale with worry. "Oh my God, thank you. Thank you so much," she exclaimed, taking the stroller from me and checking on her baby. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." I shrugged off her thanks, feeling a bit awkward under the weight of her gratitude. "I'm just glad I was close by," I replied, stepping back to give her space. She looked up, her eyes finally meeting mine, and I could see the realization dawn on her face. She took in my appearance, the worn clothes, the tired eyes, the duffel bag at my feet, and her expression softened. Are you all right?" she asked gently. I hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal, but something in her gaze made me feel safe, like she genuinely cared. "My son and we've been having a tough time," I admitted, glancing over at Ben, who was still asleep on the bench. "We don't have anywhere to go right now." Her face softened further, and she reached out to touch my arm. "I can't imagine what you're going through," she said quietly, "but please let me help you. My name is Helen, and my husband Robert and we can't just let you struggle like this." Her words were like a lifeline, and I felt a tear slip down my cheek before I could stop it. "I don't want to be a burden," I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of my emotions. Helen shook her head firmly. "You're not a burden, Beatrix. You saved my daughter's life. The least we can do is help you and your son." I looked into her eyes, searching for any hint of pity or charity, but all I saw was kindness. A kindness I hadn't encountered in what felt like forever. Finally, I nodded, unable to hold back the sob that had been building in my chest. "Thank you," I whispered, the words barely audible over the lump in my throat. "Come on," she said gently, guiding me back to the bench where Ben was still sleeping. "We'll wake your son and get you both something to eat. Then we'll figure out what's next. You're not alone in this, Beatrix. Not anymore." As I looked down at Ben, his peaceful face softened in sleep, I felt a warmth spread through my chest. A glimmer of hope that had been absent for so long. For the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we would be okay. The sun dipped low in the sky as Robert led us up the steps of a grand, ivy-covered building. The hotel's exterior, with its tall windows and ornate woodwork, exuded an air of old-world charm. I clutched Ben's hand, feeling the weight of our circumstances lifting ever so slightly with each step we took. "This place has been in my family for generations," Robert explained as he pushed open the heavy front door. The lobby was just as impressive, with high ceilings, polished marble floors, and a sweeping staircase that curved gracefully to the upper levels. "It's been closed for a while now, but it's got good bones, as they say." I could barely take it all in. The warmth of the space, the scent of polished wood, and the quiet hum of possibility in the air. It was a far cry from the cold, unforgiving streets we've grown accustomed to. Ben's eyes widened as he took in the grandeur, his small hand squeezing mine in silent awe. Robert turned to us, a gentle smile on his face. "Beatrix, I'm not sure if you know, but when I heard what you did for my daughter, I felt it was only right to give you something in return. I want to offer you this hotel, to manage it, bring it back to life. You can live here, work here, and make it your own." My breath caught in my throat. "Are you serious?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "This place, it's incredible, but I don't have any experience running a hotel." Robert chuckled softly. "You have the passion, and that's half the battle won. I'll be here to guide you, of course, and we'll bring in some help to get things started. But I believe in you, Beatrix. You just need to believe in yourself." Tears welled up in my eyes, the weight of his words sinking in. This was more than just an opportunity, it was a lifeline, a chance to rebuild our lives from the ground up. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice trembling with emotion. "I don't know how to express how much this means to us." The hotel, though small, was charming in its simplicity. The exterior, once worn by time, had been freshly painted a soft, welcoming blue. Inside, the lobby was modest but cozy, with polished wooden floors and a large fireplace that beckoned guests to sit and stay a while. It was far from the grand hotels I had once envisioned managing, but to me, it was perfect. It was a place where Ben and I could finally start rebuilding our lives. As I walked through the empty halls, I could almost hear the echoes of the life I wanted to create here. Each room, still bare and waiting to be filled with furniture, held the promise of stories yet to unfold. "This is where it all begins," I whispered to myself, a mix of anticipation and trepidation swelling within me. Later that evening, after Ben had settled into his new room, he came to find me in what would become our little office. "Mom," he said, his voice soft but filled with a hope I hadn't heard in a long time, "do you think we're really going to be okay here?" I turned to him, kneeling down to meet his gaze. His eyes, so full of innocence and trust, reflected the weight of all we had been through. "Yes, Ben," I said, my voice firm and full of conviction. "We're going to make this place our home. We're going to be more than okay." We spent the next few days cleaning and organizing, transforming the space into something that felt uniquely ours. Ben was a constant help, his enthusiasm contagious as we made plans for each room. "I think the dining area should have lots of plants," he suggested one afternoon, his eyes lighting up with excitement. "It'll make people feel like they're in a garden." I smiled, nodding. "I think that's a wonderful idea. This hotel should feel like a sanctuary, a place where people can find peace." By the end of the week, we had made significant progress. The once empty lobby now had a few pieces of furniture, and the rooms were beginning to take shape. The sense of accomplishment was immense, but even more so was the feeling of hope that had slowly begun to bloom within me. On the evening of our first official night in the hotel, I stood by the window, looking out at the quiet street below. The lights from the lampposts cast a warm glow on the pavement, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This was our new beginning, a chance to rebuild, to find joy in the little things, and to carve out a future that was ours alone. Ben joined me by the window, slipping his hand into mine. "I think we're going to love it here, Mom," he said, his voice full of certainty. I squeezed his hand, smiling down at him. "I think so too, Ben. I think so too." As the weeks passed, the transformation of the hotel began to reflect the changes within me. Every morning, I would walk through the corridors, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The once empty, echoing halls were now filled with the sounds of renovation, hammers, drills, and the laughter of workers as they brought the building back to life. The air smelled of fresh paint and polished wood, a scent that spoke of new beginnings. One chilly autumn afternoon, as I was reviewing the plans for the guest rooms, Robert walked in, carrying a stack of documents. "Beatrix," he said, his voice warm with encouragement, "I have something for you." I looked up, curious. "What's this?" "These are the final designs for the hotel," he replied, handing me the documents. "I wanted you to see them first." I took the papers, my hands trembling slightly. As I flipped through the pages, I could see the vision we had worked so hard to bring to life. Elegant rooms with a touch of homeliness, a dining area that exuded warmth and comfort, and a lobby that welcomed guests with open arms. It was more than just a building, it was a dream finally realized. "This is incredible, Robert," I whispered, unable to hide my awe. "It's everything I imagined and more." Robert smiled, his eyes reflecting the pride I felt. "You've done something extraordinary here, Beatrix. This place, it's a reflection of your strength and resilience." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes but quickly blinked them away. "Thank you, Robert. I couldn't have done it without your support. You've had it in you all along," he said gently. "Sometimes all we need is someone to believe in us." Just then, Ben came running up to us, his face flushed with excitement. "Mom, you've got to come see this." "What is it, Ben?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. He grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the large window in the lobby. "Look." Outside, the park was bathed in the golden light of the late afternoon sun. The trees had turned brilliant shades of red and orange, their leaves swirling in the crisp breeze. It was a scene of pure beauty, the kind that takes your breath away. "Wow," I breathed, my heart swelling with emotion. "It's perfect." Ben nodded, his eyes wide with wonder. "It feels like everything's going to be okay now, doesn't it, Mom?" I smiled, pulling him close. "Yes, Ben, it really does."